Hello everyone, and welcome back to Isaiah for Mormons. Today we're going to be doing Isaiah 36, and finally we're going to get the historical context for what's going on here. Now, I don't think that Isaiah 36 and 39 is original to the book of Isaiah. I don't think Isaiah wrote it. But I do think that it's nice to have the context of what's going on. We've talked a little bit about historical context, but now we're really going to get into it a lot, and a lot of things I've said in the past are going to make sense, and this is going to lay the groundwork for everything that happens in the future. So, glad to be finally here. We're going to talk about the Assyrian siege of Jerusalem, which goes on for a few chapters, and actually covers most of these chapters, 36 through 39, although there's a little bit of issues with chronological order here. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Like I said, this has literally nothing to do with the last chapter. The last chapter literally ends in the middle of a sentence. This picks up from where it leaves off in Kings. If you wanted more context, you could actually read what was going on in Kings before this, because this is almost word for word the same as stuff that we get in the book of Kings, right around 2 Kings 19. That area is almost exactly the same as this, almost in fact word for word. So, presumably this is just put into Kings. Some people say the opposite, that the Kings guys writing Kings took stuff out of here and put it into Kings. But that just seems unlikely to me. This does not feel like Isaiah to me. It seems like the guys writing Kings. And so presumably somebody put this in to help it make some sense. There is a reference in what I consider to be a mistranslation or a mistranscription in the beginning of chapter 40 that talks about the war being over. That is probably not right. The Septuagint is probably right in that case. And so, but people may have seen that and thought, oh, the war is over. That means that it must be this war. So we should put in a little blurb explaining what the war was. Well, it's probably not exactly what happened. It's probably not right, but it is useful because now we get some historical context finally, and we can finally kind of figure out what's going on. So I'll just jump right into it, and as we need to explain, I will give you some thoughts from archaeological evidence and from other parts of the book of Kings to help flesh out what we're talking about. So this is Isaiah 36. Now it came to pass in the 14th year of King Hezekiah that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the defense cities of Judah and took them. And the king of Assyria sent Rabshakeh from Lachish to Jerusalem unto King Hezekiah with a great army, and he stood by the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. Then came forth unto him Eliakim, Hilkiah's son, which was over the house, and Shebna the scribe, and Joah, Asaph's son, the recorder. So what is going on here, you may ask yourself. This seems to come out of nowhere, and like I said, it does come out of nowhere. What has happened so far is that the Assyrians have been taking over much of the ancient Near East, honestly, and now they're finally knocking on Judah's door. Now what has happened is King Hezekiah decided that it was a good idea to rebel against the king of Assyria. So he does, and the Assyrians obviously aren't pleased with this. So they come in and invade. Now Hezekiah has been making preparations, though. He knew he was going to rebel for a while. So he took the opportunity to build an extra wall around Jerusalem. We've talked about this before. But this is a critical thing that he did, because that wall was surrounding a part of Jerusalem where the poor, probably refugees from the north, lived. And so Hezekiah is really showing that he cares a lot about the poor by building this wall. We have physical archaeological evidence of this wall today. You can see this wall Hezekiah built in Jerusalem today. It's in part of what is now called the Old City in what's called the Jewish Quarter. The city has been destroyed and rebuilt so many times, and it tends just to be more, the rubble gets leveled off and they build on top of the rubble. And so when you dig down, you can see part of this wall that hasn't been leveled off to use as part of the next layer of the city. So you can actually physically see this wall that Hezekiah built running through the middle of Jerusalem. It really is fantastic. But this was built probably for the sake of the poor. And I think that's important, because Isaiah, this whole time, has been talking to the people and telling them, hey, you better repent. You better take care of the poor, or when the Assyrians come to town, they're not going to help you. They're going to open the gates and let the Assyrians come in and kill you all. They're just going to join the Assyrians if you don't protect them. So Hezekiah says, okay, we can do that. So Hezekiah builds a wall to defend the poor part of the city. He also restructures the water supply. And this means that he digs a giant tunnel, called Hezekiah's Tunnel, all the way from the normal Gihon Spring, where they used to get the water, all the way down to this lower pool. The upper pool is where the water supply used to be, and it was probably disguised very well so that the Assyrians would not think to poison it or wouldn't be able to find it to poison it. And then it was then diverted through this tunnel down to the lower part of Jerusalem, where, by the way, the reason you would divert this water like this, number one, is to get it out inside the city so that the Assyrians can't poison your water supply, which would be a bad, bad day, but also so that the poor people can get it. That pool was probably in an area so that it was easily accessible to the poor of the city. So Hezekiah has kind of wrapped both arms around what Isaiah has been saying, and that's very important, I think, to realize. Another thing that he's done, and we'll get to this in just a little bit, Hezekiah has also centralized worship. He has found that a lot of these other worship sites, which I think honestly were probably totally legitimate, had started to become less legitimate, and there started to be idolatry that took place at these sites. So he has a decision to make, and it's a decision King Josiah, many years later, is also going to have to make. And Hezekiah has to say, okay, do we keep the temples open, all the temples open, and just try to deal with the idolatry? Or do we just say, okay, we're closing all of them down except for one that I can keep a really close eye on? And he finally decides that we're going to shut them all down except for one that I can keep a close eye on. That's the one in Jerusalem. Everybody has to come here from now on. Now, one interesting element of that is that it gave Hezekiah a lot of money. Think about this. He goes around and shuts down all the temples, and what is he going to do with all the idols? They're not going to keep them. They're probably going to destroy them. Isaiah notes in detail that these idols are all overlaid with gold and silver. So Hezekiah presumably confiscates the idols, melts them down. At least the covering, you can just burn the whole thing because it's made out of wood and just covered on the outside with precious metals. So you melt the thing, suddenly you have a whole bunch of gold to use. And so when we look at Hezekiah refurbishing the Jerusalem temple, presumably he's refurbishing the Jerusalem temple with money that he's gotten from destroying the idols. So it's kind of an interesting process that's going on here. Now, Hezekiah doesn't just go in and destroy everything. He knows that some of these temples, some elements of these temples are legitimate. And so archaeological evidence that today that we've more or less recently discovered, last 20 years or so, shows Hezekiah very carefully, not him himself, but the people at Hezekiah's urging, very carefully and delicately burying these cultic objects, things like incense altars and other things like that, stones that they used to use that were kind of a reminder of where God was supposed to be in the temple, just like the Ark of the Covenant. They very carefully buried these things as though they were really laying someone to rest. And I think that's significant. They weren't destroyed, they were very carefully buried. So we see Hezekiah really decommissioning these temples and using the money presumably to support the temple in Jerusalem. So all of these things have happened. He's really embraced Jehovah, and with that, he's decided to rebel against the king of Assyria because he knows that what Isaiah said is true, that God is going to support them, and it's time for them to be free. So he rebelled, and this is what happens. So Sennacherib comes in. It says he came up against all the defense cities of Judah and took them. Now that's really what happened. We know from modern archaeological evidence that the city Lachish, which was like the New York of the kingdom of Judah, got totally leveled by the Assyrians. You can still see the siege tower that they built today. It really is totally amazing. So they literally built this giant siege tower, took out Lachish, which was, like I said, one of the biggest cities around. Which means that if they had the time and were willing to take the energy to take Lachish, almost certainly they took everything else except Jerusalem. So it says all the defense cities of Judah. You think this might be an exaggeration? Probably not really an exaggeration. They probably have occupied the vast majority of the kingdom of Judah. Only Jerusalem would have been left at this point. That's why this is so important. Judah is this close to being kaput. Isaiah kept prophesying that was going to happen. There's only going to be Jerusalem left. And that's exactly what's happened. So, then it says, the king of Assyria sent Rabshakeh from Lachish to Jerusalem unto King Hezekiah with a great army. So he's taken Lachish, presumably. Now he's going from Lachish up to Jerusalem, the last city left. He's going up to King Hezekiah with a great army. We don't know who this Rabshakeh guy is, but he speaks multiple languages. He may have been a defector. Think about this. Isaiah keeps talking about defectors and people going over to the Assyrians because the poor are not being taken care of. Perhaps he's a defector from either Israel or Judah who has worked his way up through the ranks. That's why he knows both languages. I don't know this for sure, but it doesn't seem like a totally unreasonable possibility. So this guy goes up to Jerusalem with a big army, and he stands literally on top of the old water supply, apparently. That's the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. So almost certainly he's right there, right next to their old water supply. And that is a very, very ominous suggestion. Remember, this is where Isaiah went to talk to Ahaz when he was out fiddling with the water supply. So here we have Rabshakeh literally standing practically on top of the water supply. Very, very uncomfortable. All he has to do is realize where he is and destroy it, or realize that that's a good access point to the water supply, and he can go in, poison everything, and they're all dead in a very short amount of time. He apparently doesn't realize this, but it's a very, very ominous suggestion of where he's standing right now. It says, Then came forth unto him Eliakim, Hilkiah's son, which was over the house, and Shebna the scribe, and Joah, Asaph's son, the recorder. All of these are just Hezekiah's officials who've come out to meet this envoy from the Assyrian army. And then we get Rabshakeh's speech. Now, this is probably not a speech that was literally word for word recorded at the time. Who's necessarily going to do this, right? We do have a recorder sitting there, a scribe sitting there. So it is possible that they're literally taking it down in shorthand. But it's very likely, based on some of the things that he says, that they're getting the gist of the speech and that the speech is being reconstructed later. There are things that seem odd for an Assyrian envoy to say, but they would make a lot of sense for someone later to say. So it may not be that this is the exact speech, but this is close enough. A lot of times ancient speeches are not actually the exact words for word speech of the person speaking. They tend to be kind of reconstructed based on notes or even based on people's recollections. But we have somebody here taking notes. Somebody writes at least enough down to give the gist to King Hezekiah. And we get also a letter, I think, that Rabshakeh writes, that the Assyrians write to Hezekiah. So this is probably reconstructed out of the various sources as these people are writing the history. So it says, And Rabshakeh said unto them, Say ye now to Hezekiah, Thus saith the great king, the king of Assyria, What confidence is this wherein thou trustest? I say, sayest thou, but they are but vain words. I have counsel and strength for war. Now on whom dost thou trust that thou rebellest against me? Lo, thou trustest in the staff of this broken reed, on Egypt, whereon if a man lean, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh king of Egypt to all that trust in him. But if thou say to me, We trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah hath taken away, and said to Judah and Jerusalem, Ye shall worship before this altar? Now therefore give pledges, I pray thee, to my master the king of Assyria, And I will give thee 2,000 horses, if thou be able on thy part to set riders upon them. How then wilt thou turn away the face of one captain of the least of my master's servants, and put thy trust on Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? Am I now come up without the Lord against this land to destroy it? The Lord said to me, Go up against this land and destroy it. So you can see where Rabshakeh is going with this. He's saying, listen, thus saith the great king. Now, this is stuff like this. That's how we know what Isaiah means when he says, Thus saith the Lord. He's saying, I'm the messenger of God. Because this guy is a messenger from the king of Assyria. And what does he say? He says, Thus saith, not the Lord, but the great king. So as a messenger, this is what you're supposed to say. Thus saith my superior. So that's how we know that Isaiah really is viewed as a messenger from the Lord. Because this messenger, speaking for the king, says, Thus saith the great king. Isaiah, speaking for the Lord, says, Thus saith the Lord. So not only is this showing the standard way of introducing speech, back then speech from a superior, but it also sets this guy in direct opposition to Isaiah, who's been saying, Thus saith the Lord, this whole time. He says, Thus saith the great king. And the king of Assyria says, he says through the king of Assyria, Say to Hezekiah the king, the great king of Assyria says, Why are you doing this, basically? What possible reason could you have for doing this? Who are you trusting in? What strength are you trusting in right now? It says, I say, sayest thou, but they are but vain words. I have counsel and strength for war. So he says, you think, oh yeah, I have counsel and strength for war. Everything's going to be just fine if I rebel against the Assyrians. And he says, now in whom dost thou trust that thou rebellest against me? You think you're going to be fine if you rebel. But who are you relying on to rebel against me? What, do you think Egypt's going to save you? That's what he says in the next verse. Lo, thou trustest on the staff of this broken reed, on Egypt, whereon if a man lean it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh king of Egypt to all that trust in him. He says, how could you possibly rebel against me? Who are you trusting to support you against me? Egypt? Egypt is worthless. Egypt is like a broken reed. You just like trying to use a broken reed as a staff. You lean on it with your hand, it'll just pierce right through it. It's totally worthless. It won't hold your weight. It'll just come back and to bite you. So don't think that you can rely on Egypt and that Egypt is going to save you. It's going to do a lot more harm than good to rely on Egypt. But then he says, so it can't be Egypt, but it must be Jehovah, your God. But if thou say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, Jehovah our God, is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah hath taken away, and said to Judah and to Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar? It says, okay, so you can't be trusting on Egypt, because Egypt is worthless, but you're really trusting in the Lord? Why are you trusting in the Lord? The Lord is angry at you. Hezekiah has destroyed all the altars and temples. The high places were places where they used to worship when they didn't have specific temples, but they were basically like open-air temples. So he says, don't you think that the Lord is angry with you for destroying all of his temples? Because he doesn't really understand what was going on. These guys don't really understand monotheism. So Hezekiah has the tough call to make. Do I destroy the temples, or do I continue to tolerate idolatry in the temples? And he says, meh, I'm gonna close them down. So he closes them down, but then the Assyrians come and say, God is punishing you now for closing down those temples. Now he's going to be proven wrong about this. Hezekiah made a difficult call, and I think honestly he made the right call. It would have been very difficult to regulate all those temples. But whether right or wrong, I think it was the right call to make at the time, and I think that it's kind of borne out here. Rabshakeh says, you're being punished for shutting down all those temples. But in the event, it's the Assyrians who end up dying. So it's almost like a vindication of shutting down those temples. But it's very reasonable to assume that people might think, we're being punished because Hezekiah has shut down all these temples and said the only one you can worship at is the one in Jerusalem. So then he says, Now therefore give pledges, I pray thee, to my master the king of Assyria, and I will give thee 2,000 horses, if thou be able on thy part to set riders upon them. So he says, Listen, just swear loyalty to the king of Assyria, give a token tribute payment, pledges, and I will give you 2,000 horses. I don't even know if you have 2,000 riders, 2,000 people who know how to ride horses, but I'll give you 2,000 horses. You guys can just hop right into the army, and we'll just call it good. No harm, no foul. That's what he seems to be saying. Because he says, How then wilt thou turn away the face of one captain of the least of my master's servants, and put thy trust on Egypt for chariots and horsemen? So he says, you really think you don't even have people to ride 2,000 horses? By the way, I have 2,000 extra horses that I could give you right now. So are you really going to trust in Egypt for chariots and horsemen to come save you? He says, this is just not going to work. Even one of the least of my master's servants can take you on no problem right now. And that's exactly right, actually. They're decimated. They have almost nothing left. And they know it. They know that they can't engage militarily, really, and hope to survive. And so there's a lot of anxiety here. This speech cuts pretty deep. So then he says, Am I now come up without the Lord against this land to destroy it? The Lord said to me, Go up against this land and destroy it. Now this is yet another really uncomfortable saying that this Rabshakeh guy says, because it seems like it might be right. Isn't that what Isaiah has been saying the whole time? The Assyrians are the rod of my anger. The Assyrians are the ones that I've called in to punish you for your sins. So he says what Isaiah has been saying. God said, hey, go up and destroy Jerusalem. So he's just doing what Jehovah told him to do. So on the one hand, you feel like Rabshakeh might be bluffing, but on the other hand, you're like, well, perhaps not. Perhaps he really did feel like Jehovah had called him in to come and punish this people for their sins. Now, this is a difficult issue, but I think it's something that we see in the Book of Mormon, the idea of God using one group to punish another group in warfare. The Lamanites, it was said, would stir the people up to repentance, almost like God was calling them up to come in and punish the Nephites, to stir them up to repentance, but then they were losing a lot. Eventually, the Nephites repent and the Lamanites would lose, at least in some cases. And so, is that what we're seeing here? Yeah, maybe. That God is using the Assyrians to punish the Israelites, but when the Assyrians repent, when the Israelites repent and when Judah repents, God turns his back on the Assyrians because they aren't exactly being righteous either. So there's a certain level of irony here, because Rabshakeh says, Am I now come up without the Lord against this land to destroy it? The Lord said unto me, Go up against this land and destroy it. Now the irony of that is that God is really using the Assyrians to punish Israel and Judah, but Rabshakeh probably doesn't know that. He's probably just bluffing and says, oh, well, Jehovah said to me, come and destroy this land because they've destroyed all my altars. He probably didn't really get that revelation, right? But that's what he's saying. What's ironic is that even though Rabshakeh doesn't know it, he's partially right. God really is using the Assyrians to punish Judah. So there's a certain level of irony taking place here, and I really kind of love it, because he's uncomfortably right, even though he's also kind of wrong. And that's what makes this speech so kind of awkward and uncomfortable, because you can kind of see his point about a lot of these things, but ultimately he gets proven wrong, and Hezekiah is vindicated by the event. So then in 11, we get, Then said Eliakim and Shebna and Joah unto Rabshakeh, Speak, I pray thee, unto thy servants in the Syrian language, for we understand it. And speak not unto us in the Jews' language, in the ears of the people that are on the wall. But Rabshakeh said, Hath my master sent me to thy master, and to thee to speak these words? Hath he not sent me to the men that sit upon the wall, that they may eat their own dung and drink their own piss with you? Then Rabshakeh stood and cried with a loud voice in the Jews' language, and said, Hear ye the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus saith the king, Let not Hezekiah deceive you, for he shall not be able to deliver you. Neither let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, The Lord will surely deliver us. This city shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. Hearken not unto Hezekiah, for thus saith the king of Assyria, Make an agreement with me by a present, and come out to me. And eat ye every one of his vine, and every one of his fig tree, and drink ye every one the waters of his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of corn and wine, a land of bread and vineyards. Beware, lest Hezekiah persuade you, saying, The Lord will deliver us. Hath any of the gods of the nations delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? And have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? Who are they among all the gods of these lands that should have delivered their land out of my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? But they held their peace and answered him not a word. For the king's commandment was, saying, Answer him not. Then came Eliakim the son of Hilkiah that was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder, to Hezekiah with their clothes rent, and told him the words of Rabshakeh. Now this is a very interesting speech that we get. So these people there, the envoys from Hezekiah say, Hey, listen, don't speak Hebrew. Speak Aramaic. He says, Speak, I pray to thee, unto thy servants in the Syrian language, which is called Aramaic. We understand that it's kind of the lingua franca of the ancient world during that period. Everybody speaks it that's educated, but most of the peasants don't speak it. So they say, listen, speak in Aramaic to us. You're scaring people by speaking Hebrew. He says, please don't speak Hebrew, speak Aramaic. Because he says, speak not unto us in the Jews' language, in the ears of the people that are on the wall. So everyone else has come up to see what's going on. And so this speech is terrifying all these people. And so he says, don't speak in Hebrew so these people can understand. Just speak to us in Aramaic. But Rabshakeh said, Hath my master sent me to thy master and to thee to speak these words? And he's like, really? Are you kidding me? You really think that this is some kind of tea party between you and me? I'm going to tell you the terms and you're just going to sit here and listen to me? No, I want everyone to listen to me. I'm telling all the people here, if you have ever considered rebelling against King Hezekiah, now is a good time. If you don't, you will literally be reduced to eating your own excrement. That's what he says right there. Hath he not sent me to the men that sit upon the wall, the peasants, who may or may not hate you, that they may eat their own dung and drink their own piss with you? Right? They're going to, in the siege, they're going to be reduced to eating their own excrement and drinking their own urine. So they're the ones that I'm talking to, because I want them to start a riot and open the gate to me if you guys are not going to listen to me. So then he shouts even louder, because now there's an audience, and the people have alerted him, by the way, there's an audience. So he shouts even louder in Hebrew so everyone can understand, and says, Hear ye the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. Once again, he's using that mode of address that shows the stark contrast between him and Isaiah. Thus saith the king, Let not Hezekiah deceive you, for he shall not be able to deliver you. Hezekiah's been saying all this stuff about trusting in God, and God's going to deliver you. It's not going to happen. Neither let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, The Lord will surely deliver us. The city shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. So he's calling to all the people and saying, Hezekiah's lying to you. Jehovah's not going to save this city. Your only hope is to trust me. He says, Hearken not to Hezekiah, for thus saith the king of Assyria, Make an agreement with me by a present, and come out to me, and eat ye every one of his vine and every one of his fig tree, and drink ye every one the waters of his own cistern. So all these refugees have come from all over Judah to hide in Jerusalem. He says, listen, you guys come out to me right now, and also the area right around Jerusalem, the unwalled part of Jerusalem, the agricultural district around Jerusalem, is all you people come out of the city, pay me some kind of token payment to make an oath with me to show me that you're serious about obeying me and being my vassal. You can eat from your own vine, you can eat from your own fig trees, you can drink from the water of your own cistern, you can stave off starvation right now. He talks about eating terrible food there, and now he's talking about eating great food and drinking their own water. Everybody can eat and drink from their own property until I settle this and I come and bring you to a place that's just like this place. Until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of corn and wine, a land of bread and vineyards. Just this great place that's just like this. You'll love it. You can be done with your suffering right now. Hezekiah's not going to save you, but I can make sure that you get food and that everything's going to be just fine. I'll even give you a new house. Not here, but somewhere else, and you'll be just fine. Now, what does he mean by that? A land like your own land. I'm going to take you away to another land. That was what they usually would do. To avoid having problems within an empire, you want to dislocate people from their land. At least this was the philosophy. If you took people and scattered them all over the empire, they would no longer have any kind of allegiances to their home territories. There would be no kind of religious or cultural or ethnic allegiance anymore. They would just become model Assyrian citizens wherever they were. So the idea was to just scatter people everywhere so that they wouldn't identify with their own countries anymore, because their own countries didn't exist. They were part of the Assyrian Empire. So they would just become good Assyrians instead of Judeans without a state. So that was the idea. So they used to scatter them everywhere so that they would assimilate into the empire. And they made a point of relocating people into places that were similar to their own areas, so that they would kind of feel at home, even though, of course, they were not at home. Also, there was this idea in the ancient world that you couldn't worship your god outside of the state that you lived in, because that was like his home. So you couldn't worship a god outside of that area. So that's the idea that we get here. He says you can't worship probably your deity outside of your area, so we're going to take you away, and you're just going to worship Ashur and assimilate. So that's the idea. So then he strengthens his case here. He says, "Beware lest Hezekiah persuade you, saying, 'The Lord will deliver us.' Does he really think Jehovah's going to deliver you? Hath any of the gods of the nations delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? None of the other gods were able to deliver the nations from the Assyrians. You really think Jehovah is going to be able to?" So he says, "Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? And have they delivered Samaria out of my hand?" So Hamath and Arpad and Sepharvaim are all various cities up north as you get kind of closer and closer. And they're all places that are probably in the auspices of Samaria. So he says, these gods of these regions didn't deliver their cities out of the hand of the king of Assyria. Have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? So I've conquered all these cities up there in Samaria. So all of the northern kingdom's mine. They didn't help at all. So do you really think Jehovah's going to help? So that's his point here. He says, who are they in 20? Who are they among all the gods of these lands that have delivered their land out of my hand? That the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand. He says, no other god has delivered their cities from the king of Assyria. Why do you really think Jehovah is going to deliver Jerusalem? And this is the kind of terrifying idea, because it implies also that God hasn't yet delivered any of Judah. He didn't deliver Lachish. He didn't deliver all the other cities of Judah. What makes them think he's going to save Jerusalem? Now, Hezekiah's speech, we just started that speech just a little bit ago, but his idea is, listen, you guys have repented. I'm going to save you. He continues that in 40, in the Septuagint version, which I think is better. This idea that, listen, you've repented. That's why you were being punished. You hadn't repented. Now you've repented, God is going to save you. And so that's the rhetoric that is kind of opposed to this Rabshakeh guy's rhetoric here in this chapter. So then they say, but they held their peace, the envoys listening to this speech. But they held their peace and answered him not a word, for the king's commandment was, saying, answer him not. So the king said, don't even engage, just listen to him and come back and tell me what he said. Then came Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, that was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder, to Hezekiah with their clothes rent, and told him the words of Rabshakeh. So they are listening to this speech and recounting it to him. Like I said, it's possible somebody took notes or some kind of shorthand, but probably not exactly. Like I said, some of these things are kind of funny for an Assyrian to say, but presumably they've taken some kind of notes, and they're coming back and telling him what Rabshakeh said, at least in essence. So this is a very kind of unsettling ending for a chapter because it's part of a longer sequence. But the major point that we get here is really Rabshakeh's speech, which I think is great as kind of an anti-speech of what is exactly not right. Because he thinks that God cannot save them. The Assyrians are so powerful that no God can help. He says, all these other gods haven't helped. Why do you think Jehovah is going to help? Well, Isaiah's already answered the question. That's why he does the burdens against the nations. Because the burdens against the nations say, all the other gods are kaput anyway. They aren't even really gods. So Jehovah can save us because he's actually a god, and the others are not. Like I said, Isaiah's going to ratchet up that message throughout the rest of the book. But we've already gotten it. And so people are ready to answer the question. Any reader of Isaiah knows the answer to that question. The other gods can't help because they're pathetic. Jehovah's the only one that can save you. And now Jehovah is just about to do it. He's just about to save them. And that's what we get going forward. So anyway, that's it for chapter 36. I know it's very different, it's a completely different style. But we'll just keep on keeping on with this. It's more narrative for a while. And I'll try to give you historical background as we go along. But that's it for today, and we will see you guys next time.